I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the Lenape of the Delaware Nation, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we stand. And I want to thank Heather for also doing Indigenous acknowledgement, because it's like so important for us who, not originally Canadian, but now living there. I'm Dori Tunstall. I am the Dean of Design at OCAD University, Ontario College of Art and Design, University in Toronto. And I am the first Black and Black female Dean of a Faculty of Design anywhere. I'm also a design anthropologist, and I'm African American, and all those things are important because it sets the context for what I'm going to talk to you about today. Can I say the word bitch? Okay, all right. So my talk is entitled, Bitch Better Have My Money. Thank you, Rihanna. And it's talking about reparations and design's value, design experiences for BIPOC community, and I'm gonna break that all down for you. So just so that you know the lyrics, I won't go through them all. But as an African American, as sort of mentioned before, when you talk about reparations or reparations in terms of design, like I'm like 40 acres and a mule. That's what I'm thinking about. And so that set the whole context for my understanding of how we can engage in design. So as Dean of Design at OCAD, what we do is we practice what we call respectful design. And as a design anthropologist, this is important because what I look at is the relationship between the values that one has, design, and the experiences that people have through those designs. So I talk about how design translates values into tangible experiences, and I look at simultaneously what's going on with all three aspects of the thing. And so at OCAD, we're about respectful design. At OCAD University Faculty of Design, we practice what we call respectful design. Respectful design, what does it mean to the Faculty of Design? It means valuing inclusivity and people's cultures and ways of knowing through empathetic and responsible creative methodologies.
It means deepening our relationships to the lives of materials and the craft of making.
The challenge facing design today is really to reestablish the relationship with nature. In other words, to design ourselves back into the environment.
For example, adding the indigenous concept of 7 generations to inform sustainable design.
Good design takes a certain amount of humility. We have to recognize that we can do harm as well as good.
It's about need over want.
Respectful design means acknowledging different values, different manners of production, and different ways of knowing.
The widest possible range of diversity with respect to ability, language, culture, and beyond.
Designing futures with inclusion and belonging for everyone.
Come join us here at OCAD University's Faculty of Design and find out what respectful design means to you. So when I've been at OCAD University for about 2 years and some change, and what has been really important in terms of developing this ethos of respectful design is really figuring out the way in which design has been quite disrespectful, particularly to BIPOC people, and that's sort of a Canadian term that I learned where they break up sort of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I'll go through the reasons why, because it tells us a lot about the diversity that exists within diversity, but also how we're all positioned quite differently in relationship to design. So one of the things I learned in terms of the disrespect is that my BIPOC students feel like they have to choose between their identities and being a professional designer. The city of Toronto is actually the most diverse city in the world. It is a sort of what's called a minority, visible minority, majority city. I have students from all over the world, and I have lots of Indigenous students, and they all are feeling alienated from design. And it has to do with the values of design, because as we sort of begin to unpack what design is about, or at least the way in which they've been taught, or our institution structures, it's still colonial, white supremacist, patriarchal, and capitalist. So let me kind of break down. I think Heather talked about this a lot, so I'm going to go through this part really fast so I can talk about the part that I think is really interesting, which is how design fits within all this. So we're in the United States, I'm in Canada. These are sort of settler colonial states. And what we mean by that is that a group of settlers, mostly from Europe, came over to land that was inhabited by indigenous people, stole and pillaged the land, and then set up a bunch of assimilationist policies that were genocidal to non-indigenous people. Now, particularly in the US, but in Canada too, because Canada likes to ignore the fact that they had slavery, that when the process of colonization decimated the indigenous population, then African people were brought in as slaves to perform the labor to make this whole system work. That's like the 30-second version of what the colonial settler state is. So this becomes important because the BIPOC, the way they recognize in Canada is that we all have different positionalities based on that experience. So being Black, you are brought to the land involuntarily. And what becomes really important is that no matter the fact that my name is Elizabeth Tunstall, that I speak the Queen's English, that you're utterly unassimilatable by the system because in 1681 in Maryland, they set up the legal system of white supremacy, which says that the word of anyone else does not matter in the course of law if you're not a white male. That's the whole system that we're under. And so in that sense, that system only works by setting up another group of people who could never belong to the state. And those are the Black people. Now, my interesting part of this is how design fits within this, because again, everyone's talking about the ecological aspect of things. We've talked about sort of the repair aspect of things. I want to talk about the design aspect of things in the sense that design has done some really shitty things to BIPOC people. First of which, this is one of my favorite examples because the devastation that was caused by the invention of the cotton gin. I remember reading this in my social science class. Cotton gin, invented in sort of 1790-ish, because there was lots of issues around the patent. And it was basically a new tool, technology, to make it faster and more efficient to remove seeds from cotton. And that had the amazing effect of increasing slavery by tremendous amount, yet you cannot imagine. So in 1790, there were 6 slave states. By 1860, there were 15. In 1790, there were 700,000 slaves. That number rose to 3.2 million in 1850. So great design, devastating impact on Black peoples. And there's a way in which the literature they talk about that, that's an unintended consequences, but it was not, it was by design, because he invented that to make money to make cotton production more efficient. And then that entire labor system was, again, based on slavery. So he was making slavery more efficient so that the fact that at the end of this time, 2/3 of all cotton production in the United States is produced by slaves in the South. This funded the Industrial Revolution in England, right? So it all gets tied up together, and this is why my Black students are sometimes feeling very keen about participating in design. Moving next to Indigenous. So what's really great about this conference is I actually don't have to go into a lot of depth because through Ursula's presentation, through the conversation with Heather, you get a lot of a sense of the context around Indigenous people. The issue, again, just to sort of set the framework, original custodians of the land and have actively been fighting against every assimilationist policy for the last 500 years. And what the devastation of this, my students, I'm working on a project with Anishinaabe students and a Jamaican student, and the comment that Heather made before when I talked about doing this presentation is that they said themselves that my world has been devastated for the last 500 years. And so what's interesting about the devastation is that what it allows design to do. So issues of appropriation and misappropriation in design is directly tied to this ideal that indigenous people don't exist. So you can take from them without any repercussions, without permission, without understanding, because we've effectively done the job, right? In terms of erasing their presence in the land and erasing their presence as an identity. And then for people of color, so this is where it gets really complicated, right? So generally have escaped their home to become new settlers. So there's a little bit of complication with that. And in that process, they have a little bit of like a privilege to choose how they want to assimilate or not assimilate. Now again, there's lots of painful stories about the cultural choices you make about assimilation, but in the context of, again, indigenous or Black, it is a very different experience to be able to choose to assimilate as opposed to knowing no matter what you do, you're unassimilatable. And so again, this is an amazing advertising by the Magic Washer, which is basically advocating for the Chinese Exclusion Act. And all of these sort of examples, the heart of them was to make money for a group of people, right? And so we're interested in the value of decolonization. And again, it's not a metaphor. Eve Tuck and Yang talk about like decolonization is not a metaphor for indigenous people, it is about land sovereignty. In the context of a design institution, is about liberating design from what we define as the modernist project. And really, two key values. Through technology, bringing luxury to the masses, and that the end result of that is ecological disaster because everyone can't be the king or consume as much as the king. And then universal mankind, which is drop your national and ethnic baggage at the door so you belong to the state, which in the context for many BIPOC people is colonization 2.0. So by reparations, it's important that we take full acceptance of our collective biography, right? That there's a price we must pay, and this is great, Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Case for Reparations. The other part is to understand that there are active ways in which we're trying to make amends, right? We've hired last year 5 permanent Indigenous faculty members for 600,000 Canadian per year. That's the cost of that. But the dividends of that are priceless. So we have Howard Monroe, who was speaking Michif, his Indigenous language, the Métis language in that video, is changing design process to align it with the 7 grandfather teachings. We have students who are rebuilding their language. So this is Graham Nalamba, who's done a project in terms of bringing back Zimbabwean Bantu symbols in contemporary Zimbabwean design. This is my student Papul, who is totally changing the way in which we think about futuring by bringing Rajasthani Kavach storytelling into strategic foresighting processes because not everyone sees the future as this linear thing. And all of these things are priceless, but there is a price. All these things take money. It's not about the design without the resources and the control over the resources to be able for BIPOC communities to redesign their world for themselves and for their communities. Again, I still have no Black faculty in an institution which is over 140 years old. That happens by design, and that has a cost. I need $600,000 per year for the next 10 years to be able to hire the faculty so that my Black students will not leave design. So this is all to say that design can help in reparations, but it also has to understand how it has been harmful. And that all this process of what design can do, design saving the world, that it doesn't mean much if it doesn't contribute to a redistribution of resources. It's about the money. and the ability to build your life and build your communities through the resources that were stolen from BIPOC communities. So thank you very much.
Perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of modernism is the notion that we can fix that which has been broken. Whether it be social discrepancies, infrastructural inequities, or even environmental calamity, the nature of repair induces a kind of conspicuous precarity that remains constant in the world. Mabel Wilson, Ariel Dion-Krosnick, and I are currently developing a workshop and exhibition that will open in the month before the federal elections of 2020. Working with the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the exhibition and workshop series will be only the second time in the museum's 90-year history that the work of African American architects will be shown. Working with teams of architects, artists, and designers, we will attempt to question the nature of repair as both a tool for and a reminder of the need to question who and what makes architecture today. Thank you.
This is one of the most important design blueprints in the world. It's the guidelines for the British welfare state. It sets out new plans for health, for education, and transformed the lives of millions, not just in the UK, but all around the world where these principles and this mindset was exported. But today, I think this way of working doesn't work. We face a whole host of new problems, we live in different ways, we have new forms of poverty, and we need a different set of design principles. So why do I think that design is critical? Well, firstly, if we're going to solve the problems of today, living with chronic ill health conditions, ageing, living on a fragile planet, we're going to need new tools and new ways of working, ways that help us to collaborate, ways that bring in new disciplines and give them a shared language to work together. And design can provide these tools and this discipline to enable us to share. And secondly, I think technology is going to be critical to the solutions we design. And design